Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to my channel, Do Ministry Gaming, and in this video, I'll be doing a TLDR version of the 3.15 patch notes for the Path of Exile Expedition League. Now, the patch notes are incredibly long, so if you do want to read them for all the details yourself, I will have a link in the description below. But in general, I would say the patch notes did deliver quite nicely on what the Balance Manifesto wanted to accomplish, which unfortunately for us is nerfs, nerfs, and more nerfs. So as we go through the patch notes here, you will be seeing a lot of nerfs, and a lot of them are actually quite harsh. In terms of GGG wanting to accomplish the goal of reducing the overall character power by 20 to 40%. I think with the changes that they're making here, they will probably accomplish that and maybe even a little bit more. And so something that you might be used to already in terms of a certain power level or expectation, make sure to adjust those going into this next patch and reduce those expectations, I would say. At first it might even feel like a bit of a shock, but I think once we all get accustomed to the new game and the new meta and the new damage numbers, then things might start to get interesting again, because they have released a lot of new skill gems, which can make for quite interesting new builds and build diversity. So anyway, without further ado, let's get started and dive right into the patch notes. All right, so the patch notes start off with the Expedition Challenge League section. I won't go over this. If you want to see what it's all about, I would say a visual is probably even better. Make sure you check out the 3.15 announcement video where they showed gameplay of how the league works. So I'll be skipping over that. The next section here is major new content and features. And in this section really just houses all the new skill gems, which also were announced in the 3.15 announcement trailer, as well as on the announcement page. You can actually see the level 1 version of all these new skill gems. So make sure to go check those out and see them for yourself. I won't go over these either. Minor new content. This is a lot of aesthetic stuff. Lightning Arrow and Lightning Strike have new effects and microtransactions and what have you, new art, new audio. So I'll skip that. So in terms of gameplay, here's the first section that kind of impacts the game. Act 1 changes. Basically in here, TLDR is that they are making Act 1 harder. Next, moving on, the Flask Changes. These were talked about in depth in the manifesto, and you're going to see a lot of it when we get into the patch details later on. And then the character balance in general, they're saying evasion rating is lowered to 15 now, which previously was 53, and we no longer gain evasion per level. And so you're just going to have this 15 forever until you add some more evasion to your character. Game-wide poison, so R's and monsters do 50% more damage, and they do a lot of balancing in the patch on everything else to kind of make poison, balance back out. And then Consecrated Ground no longer gives increased crit strike for enemies on Consecrated Ground, so nerfing crit a little bit there. Next section here, skill gem balance. Just adding tags to certain gems. You can read through those yourself. And then the next section is the specific skills. Now, these are all of the active skills. And in general, the active skills themselves, for the most part, received buffs. Now, when you look at this list, you're thinking to yourself, oh man, wow, all the numbers have gone up. Blade Flurry 49 versus 45, Blade Storm 150 versus 120. They all look like buffs, but believe me, these are not. Well, these are technically are, but overall, character power is going to go down, and a lot of the nerfs come from the support gems, which will be the next section. So make sure to check those out. They are far more severe than what the improvements we're seeing here on the active gems themselves. So anyway, in general, almost all the skills got a small buff. You can look through this list yourself, find the skill that you use or like, and have a look whether it got buffed or nerfed. So we're going to move on to the next section here. Lots of skills. The next section is Vaal skills. Similar to the active skills, most of the Vaal skills listed on here did receive some small buffs, so improvements in the numbers, but really realistically, when you include all the support gems, we're going to see a reduction in power. The one of note is the Vaal Spectre's Throw got completely reworked in terms of how it works, because GGG didn't want it to overlap with Spectral Helix. which is the new active skill gem. And so they changed the way that the Vaal Spectral Throw works. Anyway, onto the support gem balance. The TLDR here is that almost all support gems across the board got significant nerfs in terms of damage numbers. And you're going to see the most popular and most used support skill gems get nerfed the most. But basically, any skill gem that has a more damage multiplier got nerfed quite significantly. And I'll give you a sense of what the numbers are when I find a support gem that is very commonly used. Why don't we go down to Elemental Focus is probably the easiest one to illustrate. Elemental Focus here. It used to do 30 to 49% more elemental damage. It now does 20 to 34%, which means you're losing 10% on the low end and 15% on the top end for more damage. Any more damage multiplier gem that is similar to Elemental Focus in the sense that it's just a big, giant, more multiplier that's in this range received a similar level of nerf. It's a 15% more damage by the skill gem itself, but in terms of the skill gem's power or effectiveness, it's gone down by 30% in power. And you're seeing that across the board pretty much for all of the bigger, more common support gems. And then the smaller, less common ones, you're seeing a maybe 15% reduction in power. So this is pretty much everything. They did mention a lot of the Awaken gems they wanted to nerf as well because they were too powerful. Some of the notable ones were Awaken Hex Touch. You just straight up no longer get supported skills, can apply an additional curse. So that's a big one. But then, other skill gems, popular skill gems like Hypothermia, you just completely no longer have 20 to 39% more cold damage over time anymore. So builds like Vortex are really suffering from the nerf to Hypothermia. And then on top of that, the regular more damage with hits and ailments went down, from 20 to 39 to 20 to 29. And so, like I say, significant reductions across the board, save for increased crit damage, crit strikes, and the assassin support. I can't remember what it's called, Nightblade or something. These ones did receive buffs. Because I think GGG had mentioned in the Balance Manifesto that they felt like they were maybe fallen out of favor relative to the more damage multiplier gems like Elemental Focus. And so, for example, crit damage actually got a buff. You're basically talking about a net gain of 30 crit multi on crit damage to hopefully get people to use this support gem more now relative to the other more damage multipliers. But basically everything else nerfed. Have a look yourself here as to what support gems that you normally use and what kind of impact that it had, and you will see that this is quite a reduction in power overall. All right, so moving on to the passive tree balance section. This is broken up into a few main things. The first is they're adding a lot of, or three-ish new clusters that will focus on flasks on the passive tree, and this is to try to balance out the nerfs that they're making to all the flasks and the flask rework. And so they're adding some, nodes to the tree to help balance that back out a little bit anyway, not totally. Then there's changes to a lot of the existing nodes, the ones specifically saying that damage with weapons penetrate elemental resistances. They're rewording that to just say attack damage penetrates resistances with no change in values. Okay, this is simply a change in wording so that they can accommodate for a new skill such as Explosive Concoction, which is actually an attack skill, but not one that uses weapons because it's unarmed. And so they just wanted to make that change to make it work for a skill like that. Everything else, Flask, mostly Flask related, Impale related, Fortify Effect related. Fortify Effect is really big. They really did a big rework on Fortify Effect. This entire patch notes, you're going to see it over and over and over again. But Impale support gem was actually nerfed quite a bit, so they had to kind of rework the tree a little bit to add some of it back as well. And so that's what that is all about. Next section here is the Ascendancy Balance. So they have made changes to a lot of the Ascendancy classes. The ones that you may have seen already from the Balance manifesto is that classes that have elemental ailment immunity, so Pathfinder, Raider, Elementalist, and Inquisitor, all have that removed, except completely removed, basically, except for Raider, which instead of having full immunity is now 50% chance to avoid. So you're gonna have to get that other 50% elsewhere. And then the Pathfinder one, instead of being immune every time you have a flask on, you now can remove elemental ailments when you use a flask. So you can go ahead and read up on the rest of these ascendancy changes for the ascendancy that you play, and see if it has any significant changes. The other significant changes were to the poison, of course, the assassin that was mentioned in the Balance Manifesto, because poison got buffed in general by 50%. They had to nerf some of the ascendancy nodes related to poison from the assassin and the pathfinder. So the next section here is the Pantheon balance. They just made some adjustments to the Pantheon around curses and bleed and corrupted blood as well, to accommodate for it being harder to deal with curses and bleeding now because of the Flask rework. Okay. Then onto the item balance. There's a lot going on here. 21, 23 quality gems can no longer drop outside of temple and div cards. So, it'll be a little bit harder to get those gems. Things like Empower, Enhance, and Lighten can't drop over level 2 now. And so, you're going to have to level it up no matter what version that you get now before you can craft it to level 4. Small changes to some of the chaos items, synthesis items. Some of the big ones here, I guess, is these two. The trigger mana cost stuff. So the Veiled mod that used to let you trigger a sacred spell when you use a skill now has a 250% mana cost. Okay, so that is actually quite a bit. Might actually even kill this Veiled modifier effectively. It'll make it very hard to use anyway. And then, other modifiers on items that trigger a skill now have a base of 100% cost multiplier for mana, unless otherwise stated. So those are those trigger spell cost changes that are going to make trigger spells a little harder to play. And then moving on, in terms of the items, other notable things, a lot of impale effect stuff, fortify effect stuff getting changed up. For the most part, let's see what else is in here. Lab enchant get nerfed a little bit on the mana. Almost all of the avoid elemental ailment stuff on items, whether it's crafted or not, are all nerfed in terms of the values that you can roll, thus making it harder to get elemental ailments, which was one of their focus. Elemental ailment immunity, which was one of their focuses. Diamond Flask no longer does the crit chances lucky, only gives you 100% increased crit chance. Huge nerf for the Flask. And then down here, yeah, this big section here is all Flask nerfs. Flask nerfs, if you haven't heard about the rework, which you should have already by now, big nerfs to Flask across the board. And you can see the numbers here. Granite Flask 1500 instead of 3000, Jade Flask 1500 instead of 3000, Diamond Flask we talked about. Basalt Flask no longer does the fizz damage reduction, just grants more armor now, so big nerf to that one, and so on and so forth. So you can see that. Oh, a big one of note here is Enduring Mana Flask. No longer has a reduced duration, but is now 66% reduced amount recovered. Previously it was 30%, so that is quite a bit of a nerf to Enduring flasks as well. Then all of the ailment removal suffixes on the flasks now require you to actually have the ailment on you before you can remove it. So you can't pre-pop it and just be immune to ignite, for example, for the next 5 seconds. You basically have to have the ignite in order to douse it. And then once you douse it, you only get doused for 1 second. And then after that 1 second has elapsed, you can get ignited again. So this is going to be pretty rough. I think a pretty big change for Flask and what we're used to. Now, the warding suffix no longer grants immunity to curses. Huge impact. This one is going to hurt. Staunching, same thing. You remove the bleed for 1 second and corrupted blood. And then all these other Flask mods got kind of nerfed as well. Then on to the next section, unique item balance. You can look through all these. A lot of uniques got adjusted and mostly nerfed as well. For example, Asylum, 40% less damage instead of 33% less damage now for that particular helmet. Pledge of Hands. Pledge of Hands really got a big hit. Now grants 50% increased max mana instead of 100. So that's a big nerf. And also on top of that, Greater Spell Echo got nerfed as well, further up, up the patch notes. So you can go and check that out. Then there's the all the unarmed stuff cannot work with Explosive Concoction, which is the new Pathfinder Flask active skill. We cannot use Doriani's Fist. We cannot use a Hollow Palm, for example, with Explosive Concoction, unfortunately. But otherwise, I guess it would be pretty broken. So they should change that. Then onto the unique flasks, nerfs basically across the board in terms of the numbers. The one of note, I guess, is the most powerful flask in the game, of course, Bottle of Faith. The base crit chance is just completely gone now, which is awful. Replaced now with increased crit strike chance, which meh. But the more damage that you do when enemies are on consecrated ground, still intact, which is a large portion of that flask. And so, Bottle of Faith is still going to be very good, but you do lose that base crit there, unfortunately, and also the crit that you get from enemies being on consecrated ground. But otherwise, across the board, nerfs at Zeri's Promise, for example, 5 to 8% extra now instead of 15 to 20, on that more on extra chaos damage. So huge nerf. Cinder Swallow, big nerf. You get basically one of the 3 rolls, whether it's mana, energy shield, or life, on your Cinder Swallow now. And then, every other flask damage wise anyway, nerf, 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 nerf. So that goes all the way up to here. And then the next section. So the next section is Cluster Jewels. Similarly, nerfs across the board. The big sort of thematic ones are mostly anything that gets movement speed is basically just gone now, unless it is actually a movement speed related notable. Otherwise, they really is taking out a lot of movement speed from the game. They're taking a lot of attack speed from the game. Cold Conduction, here's a big one. Cold Conduction no longer does the enemies chilled or shocked and enemies shocked or chilled, which enabled things like Self Curse in 3.14, or sorry, Self Chill, excuse me. That is no longer the case, so Cold Conduction is pretty much dead now. It just does something completely different. Hollow Palm gives 40% more attack speed instead of 60, so that's been changed. Other notable, a lot of Flask changes, brand changes, attack and cast speed changes, damage over time, that's the big one. Across the board, damage over time on notables nerfed to, well, quite significantly. You can see a lot of the numbers here. Exposure therapy, 5% instead of 8. Brush with Death, 5% instead of 10. Tempered Arrowheads, which was already nerfed before, I believe, just not that long ago, maybe a patch ago, is now 6% instead of 10. A lot of the Ignite ones were nerfed as well, like Burning Bright. Just completely, the 8% damage over time multiplier completely gone now. What else is here? A lot of bleed ones too. Vivid Hues, 12% damage over time for bleeding, gone, replaced by 20% increased bleed damage. That is a ridiculous nerf for Vivid Hues and quite significant. So gone. A lot of the other damage over time multipliers, Ren 5 from 12, right? Cluster Jewels have really been nerfed. Damage over time multiplier for Chaos, for Bleed, for Poison, for Ignite. So very unfortunate. So if your build previously relies on a huge Cluster Jewel setup primarily for its damage, and your damage over time build, expect a lot of that to go down now. just onwards. Monster changes, basically act bosses drop fewer but better items, so we'll see how good that is. But a lot of the stuff we've already heard about. Ailment threshold for monsters are reduced, especially for bosses, and this is because all of our characters' damage is going down, so they need to reduce the thresholds so that we can actually still apply ailments to everything. Poison does 50% more damage game-wide. And puncture does more damage to us too. Not our puncture, enemy puncture to us. So there's that. Then Atlas and map changes. Not many there, just some maps got moved around, it sounds like. Not sure exactly what got moved where yet. Atlas passive changes. I'm actually quite surprised there was only one, which of course is Harbinger boss. You guessed it. The Harbinger boss from Diplomatic Escort now spawn far fewer monsters. They now have more threatening skills to compensate for this. So how much is far fewer monsters? I'm not sure, but we're gonna have to see exactly how far fewer monsters this is to see just how bad this got nerfed. But otherwise, I'm actually kind of surprised to see no changes for other Atlas passives. A lot of the other ones are still quite strong. And then Zana League mods. This is actually quite nice. The first few kind of suck. Abyss, Anarchy, Domination, whatever. But the last two are actually quite nice this league, so I'm very excited to run these. Nemesis for 4 Chaos, that's kind of crazy. To also have 5 additional packs with Rare Monster. That means you don't need to roll Rare Monsters have Nemesis on your maps anymore if you want to run Nemesis mod on your Watchstones, which means you can juice up that particular map that you're running more. Normally, it would cost you more than 4 chaos to roll that mod onto the map anyway. So you're getting it for a discount. You can run a more juiced map, and you're going to have 5 additional packs of rare monsters. I think this is absolutely going to be nuts if you run Nemesis currency strategy. And so I'm very excited to run that. But these other ones are very strong as well. Metamorph for 5 chaos can be very strong at league start for farming catalysts. So I'm very excited to run that. You're definitely going to make currency at 5 chaos. Then Ritual at 13 potentially can be quite strong as well if there's no changes to Haywark Hamlet. So I think that's quite appropriate. Delirium for 16. Oh man, Delirium price just keeps going up and up and up. Delirium orbs are going to be probably quite expensive again this league. So, you might make a pretty good payout here as well. Then otherwise, guys, I think that's really the TLDR for the patch notes in terms of impacts of the game. All this other stuff is UI, quest rewards. This is kind of telling you where you can get your new gems. And that will do it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the patch notes. And if you did, please like and subscribe. I also stream on Twitch Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Times are in the description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.